Human Experiences in Session. My name is Xavier Katana. My guest for today is Marianne Williamson. Marianne is an American author, spiritual leader, politician, and activist. She has written 13 books, including 4 New York Times #1 bestsellers. She is the founder of Project Angel Food, a volunteer delivery service food delivery program that serves homebound people with HIV and AIDS and other life threatening illnesses. She's also the co founder of Peace Alliance, a nonprofit education and advocacy organization supporting peace building projects. She later received national attention as the result of her frequent appearances on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and she is quite regarded as Oprah's spiritual advisor. Marianne, it is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. You spent some time running for the Democratic National Convention, so I can't think of a better time to have you here than tonight with everything that's going on in the world today. Welcome to HXP.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Marianne, let's just lay the foundation a bit. If you could tell us what brought you into the line of service and what brought you into this frame of work? Why did you decide to run for the nomination?
I grew up in a generation, when I was in college, we would read Alan Watts and Ram Dass in the morning, and we would go to Vietnam War anti-war protests in the afternoon. The cultural revolution at that time, the 60s and the 70s, was all of the above. It wasn't bifurcated between spiritual, social, political. It was sexual, it was musical, it was political, it was spiritual. And that's always been my comfort zone, that when you're seeking to change is multidimensional. Mm-hmm. As my life developed, what felt to me like the greatest service, that which just unfolded in front of me, had to do with teaching metaphysical principles and writing about metaphysical, spiritual principles, particularly those based on a set of books called A Course in Miracles. But I had been raised with a lot of political reference and activism, and that had always been important to me. It had just been sort of the minor chord, and the major chord professionally had to do with my work in the spiritual world. And from that came activism having to do with nonprofit organizations, the things you mentioned. I was very active during the AIDS crisis, founded AIDS organizations and so forth, peace organizations, etc. And my political evolution is mirrored in a story I once heard that was written by a Protestant theologian. And the story, I don't know what the title would be, but for me it's the story of the transition from a good Samaritan to a conscious Samaritan. I was a good Samaritan in the sense that the good Samaritan was someone who saw a beggar and gave them alms. But the good Samaritan continued down the road and saw another beggar and gave them alms. And then the Good Samaritan continued down the road and saw another beggar and gave them alms. And the way the story goes is that at a certain point, the Good Samaritan said to himself, "Why are there so many beggars?" So what I've seen, and that to me means he became a conscious Samaritan. He asked, what is going on systemically here that this continues to be the case for so many people? And what I've seen in my career over 35 years is that something started to change. Something started to change in the 80s, but at first it was situational. At first, it had to do with something like AIDS, which had nothing to do specifically with the social and economic system, although it did with the slowness of the system to respond. But what started to happen then, let's say after 2000, etc., there is a level of despair. There's a level of economic tension and economic anxiety that is experienced by what seems to be the average person in a way that makes no sense in the richest country in the world. So I began to see up close and personal the ravages that so many people are experiencing simply because the resources of this country have been squeezed too much into the hands of too few. And so it felt to me like that the people who are seeing this up close and the people who have a deeper understanding of cause and effect um, and how these things operate on deeper systemic levels should be the last people sitting out these larger questions. And so I began to realize how many of these ravages that people experience are due to simply bad public policy.
Mhm.
If people are living with chronic tension and anxiety because they don't know what will happen if they get sick, they don't know what will happen if one of their children gets sick, they don't know how they'll send their kids to college, they don't know how they'll get out from under these college loans, they don't know how they'll ever be able to get in the game in their life, then they can see every therapist and every coach and every clergy person and meditate all they want, but we've got to deal with the fact that that's treating the symptoms. We've got to treat the cause. And to me, that meant a much higher level of consciousness within the political field that I didn't see. And out of that, I thought, well, if you want to hear those things said, Marianne, you're going to have to say them. And so I did.
Wow. And very much so, you have been in the belly of the beast, and you've seen, the inner workings of the system. You got in front of the bullet, as it were. You got into the line of fire, and now you've seen sort of the pratfalls of what it's like, to run for president. And what did you see, the inner workings of the system? How did you relate to the way things are set up when a person runs for office?
The system is even more corrupt than I feared. But the people of the United States are even more wonderful than I would have hoped. That was my experience. Um, what we have is a campaign media industrial complex, and it amounts to the modern equivalent of backroom, men with cigars who in the back room were deciding who the candidates would be. That's what happened in 2016 in the Democratic Party, and we know how that worked out.
Hmm.
And it's basically what happened here as well. But let me be very, very clear and also very careful here.
Hmm.
The overriding need, I believe, numero uno, is to make sure that Donald Trump does not get a second term. That is where I live in my heart. It is where I live in every part of me. So I don't want any criticism of the system to be mistaken for any comment that I believe we should not support the Democratic nominee. But this is a very serious problem, I'll tell you that. I know what my experience was, which was that after the second debate, I was the most Googled person in 49 states, and you saw my name and a lot of media. And then 3 days later, after the second debate, boy, the hatchet came down. Somebody had clearly had said, get that woman off the stage. And the way I can say it so clear, it's because it was so clearly strategized. All the words were the same.
Hmm.
Clear talking points. She's anti-vax, which I'm not actually. We're living at a time when if you have the most nuanced conversation, you can have the slightest questioning of anything having to do with big pharma, and boy, they come at you. So she's anti-vax. It was said that I'm anti-medicine, which once again could not be further from the truth. Anti-science, which once again could not be further from the truth. She's dangerous. She's crazy. She's a grifter. It's like we're talking about, witches in the Middle Ages here or something. And that narrative was created. It was everywhere. You couldn't open a computer. You couldn't look on television that somebody wasn't talking about how I'm this dangerous, crazy wacko. And so that's how it works. They get rid of you if they don't want you. And you say, is there a they? Yeah, there's definitely a they. And however, there are two different political universes, and this is extremely important. There is that I've just described. the pundits and the media and the political operatives and the DNC and all of that. Yep, it's true, it's real. However, there's another political universe, and that other political universe is magnificent. And I saw that as well. And that has to do with the voters, particularly the voters in those early primary states: Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. The people in those states are very aware of the importance of their vote, and I'm telling you, they are up to the job. And to stand in front of voters in those states, it's a humbling experience. It is such a privilege. They are tough on you, but rightfully so. They kick the tires, but rightfully so. They ask you tough questions, and you've got to know what you're talking about. And what I was very clear about was that if the DNC had just gotten out of the way, those debates are nothing but a reality TV show. It's ridiculous. We had 20 people at the beginning, or 21, some very, very intelligent people with very, very good ideas. But what the DNC did was they created bars that made it, and only people in their club could possibly make it. Or with a token here, or a token. I mean, it was so obvious to anybody like really stepping back to look at this. And the political parties are not even mentioned in our Constitution. George Washington warned us against them in his farewell address, saying that they would form factions of men who would be more concerned with their faction than with their country. Now, I think that in 2016, for instance, if the DNC had not put their fingers on the scale, it would have been either Hillary or Bernie. But I think whoever it was, the people would have felt good about the vote, and I think that Trump would not be president today. So I think the role of the DNC should be to facilitate democracy. It shouldn't be to dictate democracy. It shouldn't be to manipulate voters. I believe, and going forward, this is going to be true with everything related to the coronavirus too. We're going to have to make a lot of changes on the other side of this. And I believe, for instance, that everybody who is a serious candidate for president should have been given the equal amount of time in front of the voters and so forth. So anyway, that was my experience. I experienced the vilification. I experienced the demonization. It's very odd to be hated for being someone that you're not. There are enough reasons for people to dislike me based on my policies, or even based on maybe some truths about me. I'm certainly not a perfect human being. But the narrative that was created, that's just not even who I am. So that was my experience. But that was then, and this is now. And I endorsed Bernie Sanders, and because I believe that his policies, obviously, every person who runs for president does so thinking, well, I'd be the best, But once I was out, and I do regret leaving, actually, because I could have made it through New Hampshire. And when I saw what Yang and Steyer, the votes they got in New Hampshire and Iowa, I thought, well, I could have done that. I thought that was the amount that you leave because it's too humiliating to stay. Mm-hmm. Whatever. It was what it was. And now we got much bigger fish to fry than just our own personal dramas now. I have endorsed Bernie Sanders, but as I said, whoever the Democrat is, I will be there with all my heart and with all my soul. I think that this president, his policies are nothing short of a menace and a true threat to our democracy. And I am filled with passion, as I'm sure many of your listeners are, for making sure that there is he goes into retirement as of November.
So, Marianne, I truly respect and appreciate your experience and your perspective of, what you experienced on the campaign trail and with the Democratic convention, the nomination, the way it works. It does seem like it is very much rigged. And so I think getting that inside sort of perspective, I think, is crucial. So, thank you for helping me set the stage. Now, if we fast forward to present day, we are up against the wall against, a pandemic, a global pandemic that is now an everyday reality for us where we are in a crisis now. And it seems like the policies of the current administration are so backwards that, it's putting people's lives in danger. Would you agree with this?
Yes, unfortunately, I would agree with him.
And, I wonder to know, how, what do you think we should be doing differently right now in regards to the coronavirus?
Well, there are a couple of things here. First of all, is personal, and second is political. On a personal level, we all have to take care of our own nervous systems as we go through this. You have to emotionally and psychologically change gear in order to be able to emotionally and psychologically survive this and thrive in the experience. We are a very adrenaline-driven society. It is the common manner of things for people to run around like chickens with our heads chopped off. And a lot of the rushing around that we do um, really at the deepest level is a way of avoiding some of the deeper work that we need to be doing as human beings on the planet at this time. Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, said that all of man's problems can stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
Mhm.
So this is forcing us to be reflective. It's forcing us to go deeper. It's forcing us to maybe read some of those books that we've always talked about how we wanted to read but never got around to. It's forcing us to be available, should we wish, to deeper conversations with friends and loved ones than maybe we had thought. It's forcing us, if we really want to get through this, to not make it only about ourselves, to realize that there are people, for most of us, who are in far more of a risk category than we are. People who are older, people who live alone, people who have underlying conditions, that this is definitely time to check in with your friends. And I have, if people go to Marianne.com, I have quite a few video sharings and meditations also. I'm making all my meditations, just putting them out there for people. Meditation is a way to literally emit different brain waves so that the fear and panic that is, among other things, so depressive of your immune system begins to dissolve. Otherwise, this thing can emotionally overwhelm people. And so that's what I meant by taking care of your own nervous
Mhm.
system.
Yeah.
Now, secondly, however, there is a political issue, a big political issue here. This virus did not emanate here in the United States, but there is a huge political issue that has to do with how unprepared we were, why we were so unprepared, and the almost criminal neglect that was displayed by our government, which allowed weeks to pass by before we even began to get on top of it the way we needed to, and which in some ways is a trajectory that continues today. That has to do with the fact that for the last 40 years, as we know, there's been this massive transfer of wealth in this country
Mhm.
through change in tax laws, through corporate subsidies, through the unbelievable undue influence of money, particularly corporate money, on our government. We have transferred huge amounts of wealth into the hands of the proverbial 1%, so that 1% control more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now, where has that money come from? The money has come from withdrawal of resources to education, withdrawing of resources to to public investment, and that public investment is investment in the common good.
Mhm.
We have laid aside what has traditionally been an accepted balance in the United States between the protection of individual liberty and protection of the common good. And we've moved so far in the direction of individual liberty. But remember, that individual liberty, for instance, the individual liberty of capitalism, it can only be enjoyed by those who have the capital to participate. But when people are so living, you've got tens of millions of Americans who have been living with chronic tension and anxiety, because of the things I said. They don't know what they'll do if they get sick or their kids get sick, or how they'll send their kids to college, or how they'll get under under these college loans.
Sure.
That took us to a place where 40% of Americans did not have the means to cover an unexpected $400 expenditure. We were in that place before this crisis. So when you said we're in a crisis, for those people, they already were in a crisis. Let's remember that. We talk about lockdown. There were people tens of millions of Americans who were economically locked down before this.
Wow.
So when you say that that money was withheld from those resources, one of the things it was withheld from are all the various agencies that you don't necessarily hear about on a daily basis. You only hear about them when something goes wrong. Everything from the Weather Service to the CDC and the FDA. You know, we had the Boeing Max disasters. Why? Because the FAA was too under the thumb of Boeing. We have the opioid crisis. Why? Because FDA is too under the thumb of Big Pharma, and on and on and on. We have so many of the environmental dangers that we have. Why? Because the EPA has been under too much the thumb of fossil fuel industries, et cetera. We had 47 pandemic centers, and the president had closed 37 of them. He has been withdrawing resources from the CDC, et cetera. And then, even when it happened, and even when we have in America, we have in every area of problem, we have the geniuses here. We have the best practices. We know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the president is among a group of people who are so ideologically obsessed with allowing the marketplace, like the marketplace has become some false god in America.
Mm-hmm.
Starting 40 years, the whole idea of trickle-down economics was the idea that market forces should be the organizing principle of Western civilization, certainly
Sure.
American civilization, and government should get out of the way, which means deregulate. They called all regulations job killers. Well, excuse me, they were health regulations and safety regulations. So that even when this began, and that's what we're living through right now, even today, when the president had signed the Defense Production Act, this is what FDR did after Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, FDR brought together all of the car manufacturers and said, I need this many planes, and I need this many tanks, and I need this many ships. And the car manufacturer said, well, President Roosevelt, we are patriotic Americans, and as soon as we've sold the cars we need to sell, we're going to get together and we're going to build those cars, and we're going to build those tanks, and we're going to build those ships, and we're going to build those planes. And President Roosevelt said, gentlemen, I don't think you understand. You will not be building cars until I get this many ships and this many tanks and this many planes. Mm-hmm. And it was a mimicry of that which led us years later to pass the Defense Production Act, which gave President Trump the power, should he have chosen to say to all kinds of industries, get these ventilators made, get these respirators made, get these masks made before you do anything else. Now, what happened? He got pushback from business, and I want to know who we need names of who gave him that pushback, because people have died because of that pushback.
Right.
And President Trump gets on and says, oh, it's so great. They're all calling me and they want to help. Well, of course they want to, but this is a national emergency. We can't take that time. So you have the governors, such as Andrew Cuomo in New York, saying we need this material. And the president even iterating today, we're not a shipping clerk. Go get your own. Because he is so ideologically opposed to the federal government directing anything, as opposed to letting the free market do its thing, even in a moment like this of national emergency. So that's the moment we're living in. Now, when you said, what does the average individual do? What the average individual should do, Martin Luther King said, we are materially passive, but we are spiritually active. We must be intellectually active right now. Everybody needs to be clear about the issues that I just talked about. Everybody needs to be clear about what is the argument going on, even right now in Congress, where there are those who say, no, we need to have this multi-billion-dollar bailout of these huge industries. Now,
Mhm.
remember, these huge industries already got the 2017 $2 trillion tax cut,
Mhm.
where 83 cents of every dollar went to the very richest Americans and corporations.
Mhm.
So even as the president himself has said, they have a cushion. The people we need to be bailing out are those people who have no cushion and honestly don't know for sure if they will be able to eat a week from now.
Yes.
So when you say, what can we do? For obviously, in your own community, find out what's happening in your community, how you can help drop off groceries. Many people are volunteering, make masks. I mean, there are all kinds of things and it's beautiful what you're seeing, people being there for each other. But we also have to recognize the lack of conscience and ethics that not only has been part of public policy, but is even now. And the people need to be loud, and the people need to be aware, and the people need to be very active. You know, I talk about this stuff so much. I don't know if I already mentioned it on this podcast, but I know what it was. You and I talked about it before the podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
The Lieutenant Governor of Texas said the other day that he thinks that there are grandparents in America who would be willing to die so that their grandchildren would have a better economy in the future. That's Jim Jones talk. That's saying literally die. We should die for a particular kind of economic order. And
It's
by the
horrible.
way, no, those kids need their grandparents. That's who they need.
Yes.
So, um, so every American needs to be deeply aware. We need to be aware of what's happening, who's saying what. And in November, and that's going to be a problem too, we've got all the voter suppression efforts, which could be aided by this. Thank you very much. We need to remember who got it right now and make sure they're in Congress, they're in the White House, and they're in the Senate, and those who are talking in ways that would destabilize the lives of so many millions of Americans further.
Mhm.
Please make sure they retire from political office.
Hmm. Wow. I mean, there's so much there, Marianne. I love each and every single one of your words because you're so clear. You're so pinpointed on exactly what we need to do to look at this. We need to communicate more clearly. This is something that you said to me, and we need to be very precise on, what's going on in the system, what has been going on in the system, and what we need to do to adjust and to fix this so that it doesn't happen again. And it seems like we are in a crisis and we're screaming out for this battle cry of visions, and we need to be very careful how we respond to this, because if we don't respond in the right way, we're going to be catapulted back into the system that led us here in the first place.
Well, as you and I were talking about before the podcast, it could even be worse than that.
Huh.
Because, William Barr, our Attorney General, was floating just the other day the idea of suspending, just for this period of time, certain constitutional protections. Also, another thing I have some concern about, I have to say, everybody's talking about bringing out the National Guard. We need to have a sophisticated conversation and ask very meaningful questions. What exactly are they coming out for? Now, on one hand, they're coming out to build field hospitals. Great, I'm all for that. They're coming out to be able to help with medical situations. I'm all for that. But let's be very clear here. The thing that I'm very concerned about, in addition to the medical issues, have to do with not only how are sick people going to survive this, but how are well people going to survive this?
Mhm.
How are healthy people going to survive this who don't have the money and aren't working? Now, I believe what we should have is, I think it should be a $2,000 stipend every week that this lasts for every American. I think we should immediately halt all those college loans, etc.
Mm-hmm.
We should be talking about, you see all those trucks that everybody's showing on the online and everything, all these videos that people are seeing, all these trucks coming in, and they're going to have National Guards people. Well, we need to be really careful here. What are they going to be allowed to do? What are they not going to be allowed to do? If you tell me they're going to be building field hospitals, etc., I'm so glad they're coming.
Right.
But are they going to be patrolling the streets? I mean, what are they going to be doing exactly?
Mm-hmm.
Because if things get too rough, I'm sorry, but Americans are so reactive. We wait until a problem happens, and then we talk about what are we going to do. We need to be responsive in this moment. We need to be several steps ahead. That's how we got here, was because collectively we don't talk several steps ahead. So let's say there are food shortages. That's what I'm concerned about.
Mm.
What if people cannot get food? There could be food riots. I want to know the National Guard is not going to be squashing the rioting of desperate people. I want to make sure they will not be rioting, which is why money has to get to people quickly. So we have all of these things that we need to be thinking about. And I think that the conversations that we're having among ourselves, your podcast is an example.
Mm.
I'm certainly putting out videos on my sites, etc. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are. The conversation, the buzz, the things that people are talking about makes a lot of difference. And Americans are very good about that. When we get a buzz about something, when we're having a conversation about something, there's nothing we can't do. The problem is that we're too easily distracted, and we're too easily lured away from the conversation about things that matter most.
Yeah, I mean, Marianne, I'm not sure if you've heard of this yet or not, but I just read an article today. I posted it in our community. This stimulus bill that they're passing. It blows my mind because the 1.5 trillion dollars that they were able to, with the swipe of a pen, it was immediately released that they were going to put out 1.5 trillion dollars. But when it comes to helping people, like normal people like you and me, it's taking them so long. But something that I saw to your point, was that the stimulus, when it comes out, it's going to create a new digital dollar. So now I think, in this idea that things can be worse, this third option, that when it's reassembled, when it all comes back together, that perhaps they can push us into more control. How about a cashless society for you?
I don't know. I hear so much. I see both sides. It's almost like, there's a part in the Course in Miracles where it says, nothing in the material world is unholy or holy except as determined by the purpose it is given, the consciousness of people. So I agree with what you're saying. You could say things about the digital dollar. I don't care what the policy is. If it's in the hands of conscious people, it's going to be one thing. If it's in the hands of unconscious people, it's going to be another thing. And I think that what we have to be is extremely alert. That, this is how we got here. People checked out from politics. People thought, there are other people handling those things. Other people are thinking about those things. And not voting and not participating. This is, so much of what is happening now, including the fact that Trump is even president. This did not come out of nowhere. This deeper problem has been accumulating for 40 years now, where our government has been so taken hostage by forces that would just it is capitalism without a conscience.
Yeah.
It is capitalism completely untethered to any ethical or moral concern for people or for planet. But in too many cases, we we weren't careful when we voted or we didn't vote. So there's only one antidote to any of this, and that is a mass awakening of the American people. And when Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power in the United States is in the hands of the people, boy, the older I get, the more I realize that is so true. It's kind of like when women are told this a lot, that if you're attacked in a parking lot or anything like that, just start yelling. Just start yelling. Martin Luther King said, that your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter. So we have plenty of time. We have plenty of time to read about what's going on, to read about read the intelligent voices. Don't check out. Whatever you do, don't check out. This is as important a moment in American history as we have ever had.
I agree. I agree. I think this is so crucial of a moment now, more than ever. Now is, I mean, if anything, I think, I've always felt, Marianne, that this is, there was something on the threshold, that we were, on the precipice of something huge, massive, that was going to change everything. And, now it's here. It is here. And, what I see with people, I get it. I understand their GABA receptors are full with cortisol. They're stressed out. People are stressed. Their 401ks are eviscerated. They have nothing left. Financially, they're hurting. Everyone is sort of locked, in their houses. And, I mean, that's if people are, doing their job in response to this virus. I mean, there are people in Florida and they're on the beach. It just shows a lack of respect, a lack of responsibility, a lack of leadership. I mean, there's so many things wrong with the way people are perceiving this. And I think it's crucial now because, Marianne, I mean, I don't think that the worst of it has hit us yet. And I'm not trying, I don't want to scare anyone. I'm not trying to fear porn this whatsoever. I'm just being as much of a realist as I can be. And based on the data that we see, it seems like, the worst of this is yet to come. When they tell you that there's no more room in the hospitals because, there was not enough action taken, and, no matter what, you cannot go there. You will not be seen. No, it's a very frightening possibility. It's a frightening. So, I understand that people are panicked. I had a moment to go to the grocery store the other day, and it was so eerie, so post-apocalyptic. I mean, everyone was so panicked. They're each staying 6 feet away from each other, which I understand. I get it. And, there was this palpable fear that, I've never seen before.
Well, but there's also a palpable experience. I think also a palpable recognition that we're all in this together. And so this is there's a line that every problem comes bearing its own solution. I think we also have a common sense of our vulnerability right now. Not only a vulnerability in common with other people in this country, but a sense of our common vulnerability with people around the world. Now, remember, social change does not come about and never has because the majority wake up and get it. The majority didn't wake up one day and say, let's end slavery. The majority didn't wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote. The majority didn't wake up one day and say, let's end segregation in the American South. Social change comes about because of a few people, usually considered outrageous radicals by the status quo of their time, who have a better idea. So let's remember, many people are awakening right now. Yes, you're right. There are a lot of people who are just going into isolation and fear and panic, but there are a lot of people having deeper conversations, deeper thoughts, deeper recognitions now than ever before. And let's remember that. A lot of what's most important is not visible to the physical eye. So when you said it's going to get worse, hello, during World War II, when Churchill famously said, "This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. But it is the end of the beginning." Roosevelt and Churchill and those guys didn't talk to people like they were children. They didn't pretend this wasn't going to last a while. I have felt for a long time, I've talked about how in America we have a crisis of adulthood. Too many generations since World War II, too many generations didn't have to go through anything.
Right.
Didn't have to cut their teeth, didn't ever grow up. Too many American men have acted and been like little boys. Too many American women have acted and been like little girls. We're not going to be immature children after this, man. And you know what? There's a line in A Course in Miracles where it says, It isn't up to you what you learn. It is merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. The human race must evolve. We will not survive. We must, otherwise, we must shift from an economic to a humanitarian bottom line. The guiding principle of American public policy has got to shift from that which creates short term corporate profit to that which helps people thrive. We must get there or we will not survive. And it is experiences like this that is proving, it's not even that are going to, that is proving to us, even right now with what's happening with the president and others saying, oh, we don't really need to direct it. Well, we can let the private sector handle this. People are dying because of that.
Hmm.
So this is deep, it's transformative, but where there's love, there cannot be fear, just like where there's light, there cannot be darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. It's not a thing of itself. And fear is simply where the mind goes when it's not concentrating on love. The question is, who can I help? How can I be of service? How can I contribute? And we are being called to co-create. And you and I are doing what we can here on this podcast by having a conversation. We're joining our resources, yours and mine, and
Hmm.
we're doing our best to have a conversation that matters. Werner Erhard said, you can live your life one of two ways. You can either live your life out of circumstance, or you can live your life out of a vision. So if all we do is react to circumstance, that's one way to live. But if you're living your life out of a vision, you are understanding where things are wrong, and you are creating a vision for what you want things to be on the other side of this. And yeah, it's tough. And you know what? All that means is that we need to toughen up now.
It's so true. It's so prescient. I mean, we we were a culture of, people at the most minor inconvenience, we would, throw a fit. You're in your car, you're raging out, at the most little thing. And
Exactly.
so, I want to rewind a little bit. I want to talk about, what you say about the American government and democracy. I want to talk about, on your website, you describe the American government as a little bit more than a system of legalized bribery, where you say that it's abandoned its primary function as stated in the Declaration of Independence. What function is it that the American government has abandoned? And, how has the influence of corporations and autocracy, how are those things playing into what democracy has been abandoned?
Well, first of all, I want to make clear I'm a romantic about American democracy. So my criticism of what has occurred in no way is a statement that I don't believe in the possibilities of American democracy. I very much believe in the possibilities of American democracy. And we have too many people in America today. We seem to have these two major categories. One are people who only want to talk about what we've done right and have no listening for what the shadows are that we need to correct. And there's another category, though, which I believe is just as unbalanced. People who only have a listening for what America has done wrong and don't have any listening for what we've done right. We haven't done everything wrong. So let's go back to the beginning. In our Declaration of Independence, it says, and that is, think of the Declaration of Independence as our mission statement. It says that we are, as Lincoln would refer to it later, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It says that all men are created equal. It says that all men are endowed by God. All men have God given inalienable rights to life and to liberty and to the pursuit of happiness. Then it says that that governments are instituted to secure those rights. Now, that was radical in 1776, and it's radical today because it was a complete repudiation, a complete overthrow of a monarchical and aristocratic system. In the monarchical and aristocratic system, the idea was that God had given power to the king and his rich friends, the aristocracy, and that they were entitled to the major resources and no one else was. We were completely turning that paradigm on its ear. Instead, we would create a society in which all men had the inalienable rights of God, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that governments are instituted to secure those rights, and, wait for it, that the people have the right, should that government not be securing those rights, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it.
Mhm.
That was extraordinary. It created this was not just a step forward in the political possibilities on earth, but also morally and spiritually. It was the idea that we would, to the best of our ability, create a society in which all people would have a chance to soar.
Mhm.
That's where it began, which was an extraordinary light within humanity's consciousness. But it's also where it got gnarly, because out of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 41 of them were slave owners. So what that means is we have always, from our very beginnings, been both. We have this characterological bipolarity in the DNA of the United States. We are, on one hand, built on principles more aspirational and more enlightened than any that have ever been the founding core of a nation. And we have been, from the beginning, we have had forces that represented the most wicked, the most violent transgression against the principles on which we purport to stand. That is the American story. It is played out generation after generation, and you know what? No less in ours than in any other. Now, if you look at it over time, we tend to self-correct.
Hmm.
We had slavery, but then we had abolition. We had the institutional the institutional suppression of women, but then we had women's suffrage. We had the institutionalized violence against Black people in the American South, and then we had the civil rights movement. It's simply our turn. And so much of what we are experiencing today is the struggle that is simply playing itself out again in our time. One of the difficulties of this one is that the slave owner was obviously a slave owner. The person who denied women rights was obviously a person who was denying women of rights. The segregationist was obviously a segregationist. Today, those who represent this kind of corporatism, corporate control without conscience, they are sometimes, they're the ones wearing the really nice pinstripe suits and talking about how much they love America. So today it's not one evil institution. It's more like that we just have to surgically remove, which other generations have done, and brilliantly. Today it's more like a cancer that has metastasized because it's an economic mindset which has made short-term corporate profit this false god under this masquerade that this trickle down economics would be good for everybody, that all there would be this small group of people that would make so much money, but it would be good because they would be the job creators. So all that money would trickle down. Now, after 40 years, we see what's happened. It hasn't trickled down and lifted all boats the way they said it would. It has created millions of people without even a life vest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we are today, and it was starting in the 1980s it came out of the University of Chicago. This whole idea that market principles, completely untethered to any kind of government regulation, should organize our society. Although I want to mention something that I think is very interesting.
Okay.
Milton Friedman, who was the main articulator of the trickle-down economic theory, he himself said that the only way it would be safe is if there was a universal basic income.
Right. Yeah.
But the forces, the Koch brother type forces that promulgated it, they didn't want that part. So then that started in the 80s with the Reagan presidency and so many of the forces around that. But then what happened within 10 years of that really put the nails on the coffin of our better nature, at least for a while, is the undue influence of money. So first you had the Supreme Court saying that money was free speech. And then, of course, a few years ago, Citizens United, which gives unlimited power of corporations to influence. And that's what turned our government into a system of legalized bribery. And so at this point, I'm reminded of the JFK quote, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." We need a political, nonviolent, peaceful revolution and overthrow of the corporatist hostage taking, which has been diminishing and corrupting our democracy for years now. Uh, uh, Louis Brandeis, the late Supreme Court Justice, said, you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's amazing. I think you answered my next question was going to be, if there is a main threat to our democracy, would you say that it is, hands power in the hands of the few, or corporate lobbying and gerrymandering, and what can we do to lessen the impact of this negative influence on normal regular elections?
We have got to show up in November with such a massive wave. What concerns me are too many people who are already saying, no, if it's not Bernie, I'm not going to vote or whatever. Please, 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 please. We must. People say, well, I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. I suggest you do vote for the lesser of two evils because one evil is handleable. you know, and when, one woman I remember in the last time when she was going to vote third party, she said, Marianne, you cannot make me vote my fear. And I remember saying to her, I wish you would, because this is a case where we must, in November, we must show up. And I know, listen, you said earlier, I've been in the belly of the beast,
Hmm.
pretty literally. If anybody has a right to say, those motherfuckers, I do. I get it. I know. I know what it's like to. I know how that game is played. I don't care. Right now, that doesn't matter. We have a more serious issue at hand, and that is the power of the presidency in the hands of Donald Trump. And so when you say, what do we have to do? Look, do we have problems that we're going to have to deal with the way the Democratic Party has been so taken over by corporatist elements in there? Yeah, we do. Do we have a problem with the DNC? Yeah, we do. Do we have things to discuss about after this next election of whether or not, what about third parties? Abolition came from the Abolitionist Party. Women's suffrage came from the Suffrage Party. Social Security came from the Socialist Party. Should there be discussions? All of those discussions should happen. However, none of it will be possible if Trump wins again. And you better believe we're good. We have, yes. Do we have a very, very serious problem on our hands? Yes, we do. Do we have the specter of voter suppression? Yes, we do. Do we even have the specter that certain forces are going to use the pandemic as an excuse to make it even harder for the will of the people to be registered in this year? Yes, we do. Show up for the struggle. That's all I can say. Show up. We have to show up. Even when you talk about whether it was the Russians, when you talk about whomever, whatever, the
Hmm.
only places where elections can be messed with are in states where it's close. So you just got to make sure it's not even close. You've just got to be involved, even if it means that the Democratic candidate is someone you're like, I cannot believe it came to this. I don't care. I don't care. By the way, Joe Biden is a very nice man. He was very nice to me on the campaign. His wife is very, very lovely. Um, we don't even have to go into that conversation. I just cannot stress enough how important it is, the answer to your question, and that is that we simply must make sure that Trump does not get a second term.
Yeah, I mean, Marianne, I really feel your struggle. I just, at the outset of this conversation, we said, I think we agreed that it's so corrupt. It's like this secret handshake thing, and then you clarified your answer and you said, if it's not close, it's harder to mess with, right? But then also, I read during the research for the show, I read that I think, if it was correct, that you declared a coup, that you said
Okay,
that.
clarify that. Let
Okay,
me clarify
please.
that. Thank you, because I did delete it 5 minutes later because it was not the best choice of words. What
Okay.
I was referring to, remember when I said earlier in our conversation tonight, I talked about what I myself experienced. That someone clearly said, "Get that woman off the stage," and that this false narrative was created about me. And everywhere you looked, I'm crazy. I'm an anti-vaxxer. I'm anti-medicine. I'm anti-science. All that even anti-gay, for goodness sakes,
Okay.
and awful stuff. Um, so I've seen how it works. I did not like what happened the night before Super Tuesday. Uh, in that last debate, Pete Buttigieg was clearly not planning to leave the race. Amy Klobuchar was clearly not planning to leave that race. The fact that the night before Super Tuesday, all of a sudden, Buttigieg is out and I'm endorsing Biden. Klobuchar is out endorsing Biden. Beto comes out in Texas, I'm endorsing Biden. I didn't like that. I didn't like because it was like with bear spray when you're hiking and you have bear spray, let's say in your Montana or someplace like Beartooth Mountains, and you have to have bear spray, but the bear has to get really close before you can spray. What happened by doing that the night before Super Tuesday? It didn't even give people a chance to process it. It was, to me, I know some people say, no, they just did that. It was not. I remember Dana Bash on CNN had just said, it was just this organic thing that happened. No, it was not an organic thing that happened. It was very strategized. And I didn't like that. So I didn't call the vote a coup. I called what happened the night before a coup. It was, however, it wasn't the kind of language I should have used, and
Okay.
that's why I deleted it 5 minutes later. But it's interesting. I'm a writer. You edit, but in Twitter world, boy, once you've tweeted it. So having
Yeah.
said, uh, not a good choice of words. It was a drama I didn't like. I didn't appreciate. I didn't think it was cool. And it had the signature of, clearly it was this huge, massive stop Bernie thing. Um,
Okay.
and I didn't like it and I don't like it. But that is not a reason not to just surrender our democracy to those people. That is not a reason to surrender our democracy.
Okay. Well, I mean, thank you for clarifying that. I did find that choice of words a bit curious, and I mean it's just very charged,
Yeah,
and
it was not a, it was, I look back at it. I actually had received a phone call from somebody in the Bernie campaign. Would you please take that down? And I looked at it and realized, oh my goodness, yeah, that was not cool on my part. I regret that.
so, Marianne, if we can switch gears a bit, and talk about, health and wellness and how people can sort of connect in with themselves, because now I think is a time where, more than ever, when you were so tired that you were working from your 9 to 5 and you came home and you're exhausted and you don't have time to read that book, you don't have time to spend with your kids, you say you don't have time for all this stuff. Now you have time to do all those things. You have time to really connect with yourself and look for that part of yourself that you've lost over the years. And so how can we encourage people to do more of that? Do we need to meditate? Do we exercise more? How can we connect into that part of ourself, our spirit, that higher self of ours that's out there, in there?
I've talked quite a bit about that and written about it. I hope, once again, that people will go to Marianne.com because I have my videos and check out my sharings on Instagram. The first thing, and also I've downloaded my meditations. This is extremely important. If you meditate even 5 minutes in the morning, that will help to fortify your immune system. It will help to fortify your nervous system in moving through this. Um, it's very, very important that we take responsibility for our emotional and psychological well-being as we go through this. There is no more powerful tool than meditation, prayer, mindfulness. That's number one. Number two, the important issue is to remember it's not just about you. There is a temptation to isolate in our own fear. But as I said earlier, where there is love, there cannot be fear. Make this about checking up on other people. people who are more at risk and of even if not physically, of despair than you might be. And also when you were talking about your kids, well, you have time to be with your kids now. Use this time. This period will be over. This will not last forever. But mine it for the gold that is available to us now. And I have I have some videos about this, so I hope people will go to Marianne.com. And I have guided meditations. I have quite a bit of sharing on what it will take to emotionally and psychologically be the people we need to be as we go through this. Sometimes you can't control your circumstances, but you can always control who you choose to be within the circumstance.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's the conversation we need to be having now.
Perfect. Marianne, I mean, this absolutely flew by, and I mean, we touched on the things that I really wanted to talk about, but is there anything that you'd like to say for the people that are going to hear this? There's going to be an immense amount of people that listen to this episode. So, if there's maybe a message for them that you have, now is that time to kind of reach out, and anyone that's listening to this, that, anything that you'd like to add in.
Well, I just want to thank you. I think that what you and I are doing tonight and what the listeners are participating in as they hear this podcast is the kind of thing we all need to be doing. We're trying to have deeper conversations than usual. And in every moment, you create the future in the present. So it's in the vertical. We're very limited on the horizontal plane right now, but you're never limited in the vertical. How deep you go. I think there are a lot of people thinking about relationships right now. Some forgiveness going on. Mm-hmm. Some deeper, more intimate conversations going on. This is the time to realize everything that has happened on our planet is a reflection of the people we have been. The planet will change as we change. As we allow ourselves to become more deeply committed to love, then we will, by definition, become more deeply committed to being of service and of use to each other. And we must evolve into a higher, more powerful, more practical love. When you and I were children, we learned about evolution. And we learned that when a species began to exhibit behavior that was maladaptive for its survival, that one of two things would happen. It would either mutate or it would go extinct. Well, that's what's happening on the planet today. Our collective behavior is maladaptive for the survival of the species. We fight too much, too recklessly, too irresponsibly, and we are actively involved in the destruction of our own habitat. We will evolve now. We will evolve, or we will continue to march closer and closer to the precipice. So, we all know the word opportunity in China means, of crisis means both danger and opportunity. So I think as we all, in our own minds right now, and in our own way, go deep into our hearts and dedicate ourselves to be of use and to be of service at this time of opportunity,
Perfect.
then more things could happen, including even miraculous things than most of us could even imagine.
Marianne, thank you so much for your time. I sincerely appreciate it. If you just want to say your website one more time for the people listening, Marianne.com?
Marianne.com, Marianne.
And I know that you were supposed to be touring at this time, but you're sheltering in place now?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sheltering in place. I have a very generous friend who I happened to be visiting when this happened. And he said, why don't you hunker down here? So I'm grateful for the opportunity and the friendship. It's someone I've known for 30 years. He's an old friend, one of the godfathers to my daughter. I'm a fortunate woman and very grateful.
That is a great point to end it on. Guys, you heard it here. I mean, what an amazing program with Marianne. And, she has like you heard, she's been in, the center of all of this, and I think it's really amazing to hear her perspective and to get an idea of, what we're dealing with. So I really appreciate her time, and for you guys who are listening to this, and I happen to agree with what Marianne has to say, and I really think you need to get out there and vote. Make it more difficult for these people to steal this election, which they might try to do again. We're going to be here in a couple days. This was a special episode. A huge thanks to Marianne for making the time to do this. Good night.